It was late when I saw it, my son's car parked outside a lawyer's office, engine still warm, headlights fading. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of him leaning forward, the lawyer sliding a worn leather folder across the polished desk. Even from where I stood, I knew my name was on those papers. My son's pen scraped across the page like a knife. My chest tightened. Was he planning to erase me from my own home? But that was only the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The kettle hissed on the stove, the old clock ticked steadily in the corner, and the faint smell of brewed coffee lingered in the air. Yet, beneath that ordinary rhythm, I felt an off note, like a song out of tune. I reached for my chipped coffee mug, the one I'd used every morning since my wife was alive. Its handle fit my hand the same way her hand once had, steady and familiar. But before I could pour, my son walked in, grabbed the mug, sniffed it, and muttered, "This thing smells like retirement." He shoved it aside, reaching for a newer one from the shelf. The words were casual, but they stung like acid. Retirement. As if I was already useless, expired, gathering dust like that old cup. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, but the sound of ceramic scraping across the counter stayed in my head like a threat. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, families snap sometimes. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. I sat at the table, trying to distract myself with the morning paper. But the silence in the house had grown heavier lately. From down the hall, I caught the faintest murmur, low voices, hurried, like they didn't want me to hear. My son's tone, sharp. My daughter-in-law's voice, smoother, almost coaxing. I couldn't catch the words, but I knew my name was there, woven between their whispers. Each muffled syllable felt like a nail driven into the floorboards of my own house. I cleared my throat loudly, just to remind them I was still here. The voices stopped instantly, the hush that followed even more incriminating. A second later, they reappeared, all smiles, asking about groceries, weather, anything except the conversation they'd cut short. I tried to shake it off, to return to routine. I walked out to the garden, clipped a few roses my wife had planted years ago, and placed them in a jar on the counter. For a moment, their fragrance softened the edges of my worry. But when I stepped back into the living room, I noticed something out of place on my desk. A leather folder. The same one I had glimpsed in the lawyer's office window. My heart stumbled in my chest. How had it gotten here already? It lay half open, as though someone had rifled through it and forgotten to close it. Papers jutted out, edges crumpled, names and numbers smudged by fingerprints that weren't mine. I reached for it, but hesitated. From where I stood, I could just make out my own name in the corner of a page, blurred by the shadow of the lamp. The folder wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't supposed to be touched by anyone else. Yet here it sat, on my desk, like an omen. I shut the folder quietly, slid it under a pile of newspapers, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. But when I looked toward the hallway again, I caught sight of my son's shoes at the door, polished, ready to leave. He glanced at me, eyes cold, unreadable, before looking away without a word. I held the mug again, tighter this time, its handle digging into my palm. For the first time, the house didn't feel like it was mine anymore. That night, long after they'd gone to bed, I returned to the desk. The folder was still there, waiting, heavy with answers I wasn't sure I wanted. The leather edge of the folder peeked out from the shadows, daring me to open it. I stood frozen, wondering what betrayal was written inside. The next evening, they called me into the living room. The television was off, the lights dimmed, and the air had that staged stillness I only knew from funerals. My son sat in my chair, leaning back as though he had inherited it already. His wife perched beside him, legs crossed, eyes sharp, as though she were the prosecutor in a courtroom. "Dad," my son began, voice steady, we need to talk about arrangements. Arrangements. A word you use for burials, not family conversations. He gestured to the folder lying on the coffee table, the same leather folder I had pushed under newspapers just yesterday. Now it sat exposed, open, as if my desk had been raided. "We've been thinking," my daughter-in-law said, her tone sweet but laced with something colder. "This house, it's a lot for you alone. Too much space, too many bills. Maybe it's time you considered downsizing." I stared at her, then at my son. My throat went dry. This is my home. I built it. Every brick, every nail, it's mine. My son leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and met my eyes with a look I hadn't seen since he was a boy, except this wasn't youthful defiance, it was control. "Dad, it's not about taking anything from you. It's about being practical. If you can't adapt, maybe this isn't your home anymore." The words cracked through me like lightning. My own son, telling me I no longer belonged under the roof I had raised him in. I forced my voice steady. "Adapt? You mean obey?" His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. The silence that followed was suffocating. My daughter-in-law broke it with a laugh so light it was cruel. "No one's asking you to leave, not if you cooperate. But if you can't, well, it may be best for everyone if you think about other options." Other options. They said it as if they were offering me kindness. But I knew the knife hidden in those words. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the table. I only reached for the folder, lifted it, and ran my fingers over the leather. "You've been planning this," I said quietly. My son shifted, uneasy. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "It's my house, not yours," I said, steady as stone. He looked away, but his wife's smile didn't falter. She leaned closer and whispered, almost as if savoring it, "We'll sort this officially soon." The following morning, I went to the diner on Main Street, as I had every Friday for years. But the air was different there too. Conversations hushed when I walked in, eyes flicking toward me, then away. I slid into a booth, ordered coffee, and pretended not to notice the whispers. But I caught fragments anyway. "Heard his boy thinks he's too old. Talk of the deed, I think. Poor man, imagine your own blood saying that." The waitress, usually all smiles, placed my cup down gently, like she was serving pity instead of coffee. "On the house today, Mr. Whitman," she said softly, and that hurt worse than an insult. I stared into the steam rising from the mug, the same way I had stared into the folder's shadows the night before. Betrayal, like steam, filled every corner, it didn't matter if you breathed it in or not. By the time I left the diner, I knew it wasn't just my son and his wife turning against me. The whole town was beginning to watch, to whisper, to judge. And that folder, the one that seemed to follow me everywhere, wasn't just paper and leather anymore. It had become the weight of my survival. As I walked home, I pictured that folder again, lying on the table like an execution order waiting for my signature. The question wasn't if they'd push me, but how soon they'd force my hand. The first sign came as a silence. No text from the bank, no envelope in the mail. For years, I had tracked every payment, every deposit. 30 years of habit doesn't break overnight. So when nothing arrived that week, I knew something was wrong. I logged into my account, expecting a glitch. Instead, my stomach dropped. Transfers I hadn't authorized. Large withdrawals. Mortgage payments rerouted through a different account. And then the one that broke me, my son listed as a joint manager on bills I never gave him access to. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard the wood creaked. The folder sat there too, open again, as if mocking me. New pages tucked inside, bank printouts, bills with my name but not my signature. The smell of ink and leather filled my nose like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. I heard the door swing open behind me. My son strolled in, holding a grocery bag. He tossed it on the counter without looking at me. "Hey, Dad. Don't worry about the bills. We've been managing things. You don't need to stress." I turned slowly. Managing things? With my money? He frowned like I was being unreasonable. "It's for efficiency. You forget deadlines sometimes. We just streamlined it." Streamlined. A word thieves use when they want to sound professional. His wife appeared in the doorway, arms folded, smirk painted on her face. "Money needs young hands now. You've done enough. Let us handle it." Handle it? My voice cracked. I lifted the folder, flipping pages toward them. "Is that what this is? Handling?" My son shrugged, but his wife leaned forward, tone sharper now. "You can't live forever in control, William. Everyone passes the torch eventually. A torch isn't passed by theft. It's ripped away." For the first time, I saw it clear. This wasn't about helping me. It was about pushing me out. Not just from the house, but from my own life. I slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You crossed a line." My son's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to his wife, and I saw her give him the smallest nod. That gesture told me everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. He tried to soften his voice. "Dad, you're making this harder. We're only thinking of the future." I stepped closer, folder pressed against my chest like a shield. "Whose future? Yours? Or mine?" The silence that followed said enough. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after they'd gone to bed. The folder lay open in front of me, pages spread like evidence in a trial. My hand trembled as I traced the lines of my own name on papers I hadn't touched. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The house creaked, heavy with memories of my wife, her laughter, her hand on my shoulder when the bills piled up years ago. She had trusted me to protect this home. Now it felt like my own blood was erasing that trust one signature at a time. I whispered into the empty room, "Not yet. You won't take this from me. Not yet." The folder seemed to glare back, its leather sheen catching the lamplight, daring me to find the courage to fight. I closed it slowly, a vow forming inside me. This wasn't mismanagement. It was theft, and I would prove it. Dinner that evening was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. My son sat at the head of the table, where I had always sat. The sight of him there cut deeper than words. His wife spooned food onto his plate before serving anyone else, as though she were crowning him king of a house I had built. The leather folder lay between us, perched on the table like a witness waiting to testify. I reached for my fork, but before I could lift it, my son leaned back and said, "Dad, it's time you stopped fighting us. Either follow our lead, or be irrelevant." His wife's laugh was short, sharp, almost gleeful. "He means it kindly. You've had your run. It's our turn now." The air went cold. The words weren't just disrespect, they were a declaration. I set my fork down slowly. My voice was calm, but my hand trembled on the table. "You don't get to erase me. Not in this house." My son leaned forward, elbows resting on the wood, and met my eyes with something that felt like a challenge. "Dad, you're clinging to the past. If you can't accept change, you'll just make it harder for everyone. We need to move forward, and if you won't move with us, then step aside." Step aside. Like I was some obstacle on the road of their future. My daughter-in-law tilted her head, her voice smooth as silk but twice as sharp. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign what we've prepared. You'll still have a room here, for now." That wasn't an offer, it was a sentence, I said. For a moment, no one moved. Then my son reached for the folder, pushing it toward me across the table. The scrape of leather against wood sounded like a coffin lid closing. I looked down at it, then at the chair he occupied. My chair. My wife used to sit across from me there, smiling through candlelight. That memory twisted inside me like a knife. I pushed the folder back. No. His face hardened, and for the first time I saw the mask of civility slip. Then don't blame us for what comes next. The room fell into silence, only the clink of my daughter-in-law's spoon against her plate breaking it. She smirked, confident, as though the verdict had already been passed. But inside me, something shifted. The humiliation burned so hot it forged something harder than rage, resolve. I stood slowly, my chair scraping back. Their eyes followed me, expecting an outburst, expecting a plea. Instead, I walked past them, calm, steady, and disappeared down the hall. In my bedroom, I pulled out the old suitcase from the closet. Dust clung to its leather edges, the same way the folder's leather clung to my fingertips. I set it on the bed, flipped the clasps open, and began to pack. Shirts, trousers, socks, each folded with a strange clarity, like I'd been preparing for this moment all my life. Last, I picked up the folder from the table and slid it into the suitcase, laying it on top of everything else. Not because I wanted it, but because it belonged to me, and I wouldn't let them use it against me again. When I returned to the dining room, suitcase in hand, their faces shifted from smugness to shock. "Dad, what are you doing?" my son asked, rising from his stolen chair. I looked at him, then at her, and for the first time, I smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, just a thin, knowing smile. "You thought I would beg. You thought I would bend." The suitcase handle creaked under my grip as I walked toward the door. But instead, I said softly, "I'm leaving." The door shut behind me with a final click, and in that silence, I knew, the war had only begun. The suitcase handle was cold in my palm, its weight heavier than it should have been. Inside were only clothes, medicine, and the folder, yet it felt like I was carrying the history of my life. I pulled it from the closet, the zipper rasping open like thunder. Every sound echoed in the quiet house, a funeral march through the hallway I had walked for decades. My footsteps creaked against the old wooden floorboards, each one reminding me, this house no longer belonged to me. The wall stared back at me with family photos, my wife smiling, my son as a boy holding my hand. Now, he sat in the dining room, smirking at my silence. I caught his voice drifting from the living room as I wheeled the suitcase across the floor. "Good riddance," he muttered. The word struck like a whip. My daughter's voice followed, softer, uncertain, "Maybe we shouldn't push him this far." But her doubt was drowned out by his arrogance. I kept walking. My grip on the folder tightened. I didn't say a word. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. At the door, I paused. The brass handle was cold, reflecting the lamplight in a way that reminded me of handcuffs. For a moment, I felt chained to this place, its memories, its betrayals. Then I turned the handle, and the lock clicked open like freedom. I stepped outside into the night. The air was cooler, sharper, almost cleansing. Behind me, the house loomed, lit but hollow, like a stage after the actors had betrayed the script. I didn't look back. The motel smelled of cigarettes and bleach, its neon sign buzzing faintly as if mocking the silence I carried with me. I checked in quietly, handing over cash with the same steady hands that had once paid the mortgage on my home. The clerk raised an eyebrow when he saw my suitcase. "Mr. Whitman?" he asked, voice cautious. "Didn't expect to see you here. Everything all right?" His question wasn't curiosity, it was gossip already sprouting. In a small town, word travels faster than truth. "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, my voice calm, though inside I felt like glass cracking under pressure. He nodded, but I caught the look in his eyes, pity, confusion, maybe even judgment. Before I even left the lobby, I knew by morning the whispers would spread. "Did you see William? Checking into a motel? Must be trouble at home." Maybe his kids forced him out. Public fallout had begun. The room was small, peeling wallpaper, a single lamp buzzing with flies, but it was mine. And more than that, it was free of their voices. I set the suitcase down on the bed and placed the folder on the desk under the harsh yellow lamp. The leather gleamed like something alive, daring me to act. I opened it. Inside were the bills they had rerouted, the forged authorizations, the withdrawals. I circled the overdue mortgage entry with a red pen I had carried in my jacket pocket. The ink bled across the paper like fresh blood, marking the start of my war. For years, I had signed checks for them, bailed them out of small debts, funded their comforts. But now the folder was no longer their weapon. It was mine. Every page they filled with betrayal would turn into evidence. I leaned back in the chair, the lamp casting a sharp glow over the folder, and listened to the silence. For the first time in years, the silence was mine, not controlled by their whispers or demands. The motel phone rang once, startling me. I let it go. I knew who it would be. Either his fury or her false concern. I wasn't ready to hear either. Instead, I closed the folder gently, slid it to the center of the desk, and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." As the neon light outside flickered through the curtains, I realized tomorrow wouldn't just be another day. Tomorrow would be the day I started dismantling their world, page by page, dollar by dollar. By sunrise, I had a phone in one hand and the folder in the other. The motel room smelled of stale smoke and coffee grounds, but to me it was a war room. The desk, scarred with cigarette burns, became my battlefield. The folder lay open across it, its pages spread like maps of enemy territory. I stared at the mortgage payment slip, the same one I had circled in red the night before. The ink bled through the paper like a wound. I tapped the number into the phone and waited. "Mortgage department," a voice answered. "This is William Whitman," I said, steady, calm. "Cancel the auto pay on account 4827. Effective immediately." The clerk hesitated. "Sir, are you sure?" "I'm very sure," I cut in. My voice carried the weight of 30 years of sacrifice, 30 years of silence. "Cancel it." The click of her keyboard echoed in my ear. A moment later, she confirmed it was done. The line went dead, and I sat there, breathing hard. That click, that simple confirmation, felt like pulling a trigger. For the first time, the power was mine again. I turned to the next set of papers. Insurance. They had added themselves to my policies without asking, treating my accounts like their safety net. I called the company, voice clipped, precise. "Remove Harry Whitman and Claire Whitman as authorized users. Today." There was protest on the other end, but I stood firm. 10 minutes later, their names vanished from my coverage. The folder stared back at me, thinner now, but heavier in meaning. I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. Next came the credit cards. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled out the card from my wallet, the one my son had maxed 3 times before. I dialed the bank. "Remove secondary cardholders. Freeze all joint activity. Authorize primary only." The rep confirmed, and when the call ended, I laughed, quiet, bitter, but real. For the first time in years, my account balance belongs only to me. I kept going. Grocery transfers. Utility autopayments. Even the small allowance I had been slipping into their account each month, believing it was helping them get on their feet. Gone. Each cancellation lifted a weight off my shoulders. Each denial carved away another piece of the control they thought they had. The motel room filled with the rustle of papers, the sound of my pen scratching notes in the margins. To anyone else, it was just bureaucracy. To me, it was battle. The folder no longer looked like evidence of betrayal, it looked like a weapon, sharpened by signatures, sealed with stamps. They thought my silence was weakness. They forgot silence sharpens into steel. I closed the folder, pressed my palm flat against the leather, and felt my heartbeat steady. By afternoon, the calls began. First, a voicemail from Harry, his voice tight with irritation. "Dad, the mortgage bounced. Must be a mistake. Call me back." Then another. Louder, angrier. "What the hell did you do? The insurance company says we're not on the policy anymore." I didn't answer. I didn't delete them either. I let them pile up, each one a record of their unraveling. I sat by the window, watching the parking lot empty as the sun dipped lower. The neon sign flickered again, humming like a witness to everything I'd done. For the first time, I felt control return, not as a whisper, but as a roar inside me. By nightfall, I had turned the tide. They didn't know it yet, but their comfort was already collapsing. I leaned back in the chair, folder closed tight, and whispered, "Tomorrow their phones will ring, their bills will bounce, and my silence will be deafening." By Wednesday, my phone showed 12 missed calls. By Friday, there were 22. Each one stacked like bricks in a wall I refused to climb. I didn't answer. I let them talk into the void, their voices trapped in voicemails. The first ones were angry. "Dad," Harry snapped, "the bank says the mortgage bounced. What the hell did you do? Call me back. Now." The second was colder. Claire's voice, sharp as glass, "Insurance cancelled? Do you want us to be on the street? Fix this." I listened once, then deleted. By Saturday, the tone shifted. Harry again, but this time, cracks in his voice. "Dad, listen, this isn't funny. We've got bills. The kids need," his words cut off, swallowed by static. Claire followed with her own. Not sharp this time, but shaky. "We can't cover groceries this week. Please. Just turn it back on." I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the folder open on the desk under the lamp. Each message I played, I brushed my hand across its leather cover, as if the voices inside the phone and the papers in front of me were two halves of the same story. The motel was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The clock ticked, the pipes groaned, and every sound outside, footsteps in the hall, a door slamming shut, echoed louder than it should. I walked to the diner one afternoon, ordered coffee, and sat by the window. The waitress didn't ask questions, but a man at the counter leaned toward another. "Heard Harry's in trouble," he whispered. "Mortgage payments missed," the other replied. "And William?" "Motel. Saw him check in." They didn't know I was listening. They didn't need to. The whispers traveled fast enough that soon the whole town would know. The son who tried to take his father's house was now losing his own footing. I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the mug like a metronome of patience. I didn't join in the gossip. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the work for me. By Sunday, the voicemails grew frantic. "Harry again, Dad, pick up. We're getting notices. Do you want us evicted? Is that what you want?" Claire's voice followed, softer, almost pleading. "William, please. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Just help us, one last time." I leaned back in the chair, folder on my lap, and whispered into the empty room, "One last time? That's what you said every time." I deleted the message without hesitation. But then came the knock. It was sharp, sudden, rattling the motel door so hard the frame shook. My heart jumped. I froze, staring at the door's peephole as shadows shifted on the other side. Through the circle of glass, I saw them both. Harry's shoulders hunched, his jaw clenched, Claire beside him, her face pale, eyes red from tears. They looked nothing like the victors who had pushed me out of my home. Desperation makes even the boldest thieves look like beggars. I didn't open the door. Not yet. I just stood there, watching their shapes through the glass, while the folder rested against my chest like armor. Their fists pounded again, louder this time, and Harry's voice rose, "Open up, Dad. We're not leaving until you do." The knock rattled the door again. Sharp. Insistent. Like a hammer driving nails into wood. I stood in the motel room's stale air, folder pressed tight to my chest. Through the peephole, Harry's face loomed, jaw clenched, sweat shining on his forehead. Claire stood beside him, arms wrapped around herself, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Open up, Dad," Harry barked, voice low and dangerous. "We're not leaving until you do." I unlatched the chain but kept the door only half open. The narrow gap between us was intentional, power in inches. "What do you want?" My tone was calm, almost bored. Harry shoved against the doorframe, but I didn't move. His eyes burned. "You're ruining us." "Over what? Pride?" Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling. "William, please, we need you. The bills, the kids." I raised my hand, silencing her. "You gave me the ultimatum. I only followed it." The words landed heavier than a slap. Harry flinched, but tried to cover it with a sneer. "Don't twist this. You're acting like some martyr. You're just being selfish." I shifted slightly, letting the light fall across the open folder on the desk behind me. Pages fanned out, bank statements, policy cancellations, mortgage slips, all circled in red. Evidence lined up like soldiers waiting for battle. "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice steady. 30 years of paychecks. 30 years of sacrifice. And you call this selfish? Harry's nostrils flared. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the house over, and we'll..." "Stop." My voice cut sharp enough to silence him. Claire's eyes darted between us. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked smaller now, fragile in the motel's dim light. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Funny thing, Harry. The banker called me yesterday." His face stiffened. "They said someone tried to take a $50,000 loan," I continued, my words deliberate. "Against my house. Using my name." Claire's head snapped toward him, eyes wide. "What?" Harry's mask cracked. His jaw twitched, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. I stepped back, folding my arms. "Did you think they wouldn't tell me? Did you think your fraud would stay hidden?" Claire's voice rose, shaking. "Harry, tell me he's lying." He didn't answer. "You didn't just betray me, you lied to her too." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Claire's face crumpled, her loyalty shattering right there in the doorway. "You told me he gave permission," she whispered, voice breaking. "You said it was handled. You said..." Harry snapped, his voice sharp, desperate. "Shut up, Claire." But she didn't. Tears welled, spilling freely. She stared at me, then back at him, and whispered the words I knew would haunt him, "You lied to me." The hallway outside the room had grown quiet. The clerk downstairs must have told others, shadows stirred, footsteps slowed. I could feel eyes on us, unseen but present. Public fallout had arrived, whether they knew it or not. I kept my hand steady on the doorframe. "You tried to steal from me, Harry. And now everyone will know it." Harry lunged forward, face red, teeth bared. For a moment, I thought he might swing. But the gap in the door held him back, the folder in plain sight keeping him frozen. He leaned close, so close I could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." His words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. I slammed the door shut, the chain clinking back into place. Inside, I leaned against the door, folder clutched in my arms. My heartbeat pounded, but my hands were steady. Through the thin walls, I could still hear Claire's muffled sobs, Harry's curses. Their footsteps faded down the hall, but not before one last echo carried to me. He's going to pay for this. Turned back to the desk, folder glowing under the lamp. Their threats didn't scare me anymore. Because now I had something they couldn't fight, proof. By Monday morning, my anger had cooled into something sharper. Not rage, not grief, something cleaner. Resolve. The folder no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a weapon. I carried it under my arm as I walked down Main Street, the autumn wind biting at my face. People's eyes followed me. Some nodded. Some whispered. The motel clerk must have spread the word, and now the whole town knew something had broken inside the Whitman family. The lawyer's office stood on the corner, the same one where I had first seen Harry's car that night. This time, I didn't watch from the outside. I stepped through the door. The air smelled of paper and ink, heavy with the weight of other people's troubles. The receptionist glanced up, startled, as I placed the leather folder on the counter. Its thud echoed in the quiet room. "I need to see Mr. Jacobs," I said. My voice didn't waver. Minutes later, I sat across from him, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, a man who had drafted half the wills and deeds in town. He opened the folder, flipping through each page, his brow furrowing deeper with every sheet. "Mr. Whitman," he said slowly, "this isn't just mismanagement. This is fraud. Forged authorizations. Attempted loan under your name. If you press this, Harry could face criminal charges." The words should have broken me. Instead, I felt lighter. For months, I had carried shame in silence. Now, the law itself was saying I had been wronged. "File everything," I told him. "Eviction. Restraining order. Whatever it takes." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It won't be easy, going against your own blood." I leaned forward, eyes steady. "Blood doesn't give you the right to steal." By noon, the sheriff himself held the folder in his hands. He turned the pages with slow precision, his thick fingers brushing each signature, each red circle I had drawn. "You've got enough here to bury him legally," he said. "Forgery, fraud, harassment." "Then do it," I replied. He glanced at me, measuring my resolve. "Are you sure you want this served on your own son?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. I gave him chances. He used them to tighten the noose. Now I'll cut the rope. For 30 years, my pen signed his future. Now it signs his end. The sheriff stamped the first page, the heavy seal pressing down with finality. The sound echoed in my ears like a gavel striking wood. When I left the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. On the steps, 2 women paused their conversation to stare. One whispered, "That's William, heard he's filing papers against his boy." The other shook her head. "About time someone stood up to that Harry." Their words weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They carried weight, the shift of respect returning. I walked past them without a word, the folder clutched firmly in my hand. For years, it had been a symbol of my humiliation. Today, stamped and sealed, it was my shield. That night in the motel, I laid the folder on the desk once more. Its surface gleamed in the lamplight, heavier now with the sheriff's seal pressed into the pages. I poured myself a cup of bitter motel coffee and sat down. My hand rested on the leather as if to steady it. The silence in the room felt different tonight. Not lonely. Not broken. But waiting. Because tomorrow, the knock at the door wouldn't be mine to fear. It would be theirs. I whispered into the dim light, "Tomorrow, justice knocks for them. And this time, the sound will be louder than any of their threats." By Tuesday morning, the calls had gone quiet. No voicemails. No pounding at the door. Just silence. It wasn't peace, it was the silence of a battlefield after the first cannon has fired. I didn't have to wait long to see the damage. At the diner, I sat with a cup of coffee as conversations swirled around me. A man in a work jacket leaned toward his friend. "Did you hear? Harry Whitman got suspended from the firm." "Suspended? For what?" "Something about misuse of funds. Boss called him out in front of the whole office." I stirred my coffee slowly, eyes on the steam. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. But inside, something steadied. The folder sat on the seat beside me, a constant companion. Inside it, I kept a copy of the HR letter that had found its way to me, formal, stamped, undeniable. Harry wasn't just losing me. He was losing the facade he had built for the world. Later that afternoon, I passed by the hardware store. The owner, Mr. Randall, stepped out and clapped me on the shoulder. "William," he said, lowering his voice, "we heard about what you did. About the papers." I met his eyes but said nothing. He nodded, respect heavy in his tone. "For years, I wondered how you carried it all. Now I know." It was strange. For months, I had been treated as invisible, weak, even disposable. Now, every handshake, every nod, felt like repayment for those silent humiliations. Meanwhile, the cracks in Harry's world widened. A former colleague stopped by my motel. He stormed out of the office, red as a beet. Yelled at everyone, called the boss a liar. People laughed at him, William. They laughed. The same man who used to brag about his promotions, now reduced to a joke. I thanked him quietly, but when he left, I opened the folder again. I slipped the HR letter out, read it once more, then returned it to its place. Each page was more than evidence, it was a stone in the wall I was building between us. Every document they forged became another nail in the coffin of their reputation. By evening, I saw them. Harry and Claire stood outside the grocery store, arguing under the fluorescent lights. His hands waved wildly, hers folded tight across her chest. People stared, passing by with cartwheels squeaking on the pavement. "Lower your voice," Claire hissed, but Harry only grew louder. "You believed him? You actually believed his lies," he shouted, face twisted. Claire's reply was a whisper, but I caught it, "Because yours keep changing." That sentence hit him harder than any fist. He shoved the cart away, storming off, leaving her standing alone. Heads turned. Whispers spread. Claire's eyes darted around, humiliation painted across her face. I stood across the street, folder tucked under my arm, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the one being watched. They were. When I returned to the motel, the phone was ringing. I let it go to voicemail. Harry's voice filled the room. "Desperate now. Dad, please. They're saying things at work. They're calling me a fraud. I could lose everything. Just, stop this. Please." I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. Instead, I placed the folder back on the desk, the sheriff's seal still pressed against its cover, and whispered to the empty room, "You already lost everything. You just don't know it yet." The next morning, I heard church bells ringing. I knew where the next battle would be fought, and this time, it wouldn't just be professional collapse. It would be moral judgment, in front of the whole town. Sunday morning, the bells rang across town, summoning everyone to church. I hadn't planned to go, not after the week I'd had. But something in me knew I needed to sit in that pew, to see the faces, to hear the whispers firsthand. The chapel was full, sunlight streaming through stained glass, painting the room in fractured color. Families shuffled in, children tugging on sleeves, neighbors nodding to one another. I slid into the back row, the folder resting on my lap like a hymnal. When Harry and Claire walked in, the air shifted. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. They sat 2 rows ahead, stiff, eyes darting. It was the first time in weeks they looked smaller than me. The pastor began the sermon, about trust, about stewardship, about honoring the sacrifices of those who came before. His words weren't about us, but every sentence seemed to land squarely on Harry's shoulders. Then, as the offering plate was passed, Harry did something I never expected. He stood. "Pastor," he said, voice louder than it should have been, "may I say something?" A ripple went through the room. The pastor hesitated but nodded. Harry turned, facing the congregation. His eyes were red, his jaw tight. "I've been accused of things, by my father. Things that aren't true. He's trying to paint me as a thief. As ungrateful. But I love my family. I've only tried to take care of them." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, from the front, Mrs. Randall, the hardware store owner's wife, spoke, her voice clear. "Taking care of family doesn't mean forging papers, Harry." Murmurs spread like wildfire. People glanced at one another, nodding, whispering. Claire sat frozen, her hands clasped tight, her face pale. The pastor raised his hand, his voice firm. "Harry, this is not the place to defend lies. The truth will always surface, and the truth belongs to God. You need repentance, not justification." The weight of the words hung in the air. Harry's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He sat down hard, his head in his hands, while the whispers grew louder. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The community was speaking for me now. I only placed my hand on the folder resting in my lap, its leather warm from the sunlight pouring through the stained glass. Inside were all the proofs, the forged loan attempts, the bank slips, the letters. I didn't need to wave them in the air. The town already knew. Sometimes revenge doesn't require shouting. Sometimes it only needs silence, and an audience. After the service, as people spilled into the courtyard, I felt eyes on me. Neighbors who once looked away now shook my hand, nodded, murmured words of respect. "Stay strong, William. You did what you had to. Family or not, wrong is wrong." Claire lingered by the steps, avoiding everyone's eyes. She looked at me once, just once, but in that glance I saw it, shame, regret, and a flicker of realization that maybe she had chosen the wrong side. Harry stormed past, jaw clenched, refusing to meet my gaze. His voice was low, but I caught it anyway. "This isn't over." No, I thought. It was far from over. But for the first time, the community wasn't blind to his mask. They had seen it slip. That night, back at the motel, I set the folder on the desk again. The lamp lit its edges like a halo, ironic in its glow. I opened it slowly, flipping to the deed papers, the ones he had tried to twist into a noose around my neck. Now they were my blade. I closed the folder, whispering, "Next time, it won't just be humiliation. It'll be the final strike." The morning after the church service, I walked into the bank carrying the folder under my arm. Its leather was worn, edges frayed, but it had grown heavier with every week of betrayal. This time, though, I didn't feel the weight dragging me down. I felt it pushing me forward. The banker, Mr. Lawson, rose as soon as he saw me. His expression wasn't pity anymore, it was respect. "Mr. Whitman," he said, "we've finished reviewing the paperwork. You were right. Someone attempted to transfer ownership of the deed. Forged signature. Sloppy work, too." He slid a new set of documents across the desk. "If you'd like, we can secure the deed under your name only. Permanently." I placed the folder beside his stack, the two sets of papers facing each other like opponents. "Do it," I said simply. He nodded. "And the loan attempt?" "We've flagged it. There will be consequences." I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. "Good. Then let the consequences begin. By afternoon, the sheriff served the eviction papers. Harry and Claire's names were stamped in black ink across the top, as undeniable as scripture. I didn't go with the sheriff, I didn't need to. I only imagined the look on their faces as the envelope was placed in their hands, their fortress of arrogance crumbling at the threshold of the house they thought they owned. The sheriff later told me Harry shouted, swore, tried to deny it. Claire just stood there, silent, eyes hollow. You've done what few men could, the sheriff said when he returned the receipt. You've cut them off at the root. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it signs its name in black ink. That evening, I returned to the motel, but I didn't sit quietly this time. I spread the folder's contents across the desk: forged loan slips, insurance cancellations, bank withdrawals, the HR letter, and now the sheriff's eviction notice. Piece by piece, I had turned their weapons into mine. For months, they had chipped away at my dignity, believing I would stay silent. Now the silence was theirs. But the final twist came not from the bank or the sheriff, it came from me. I called Mr. Jacobs, the lawyer, and asked him to draft one more document. A new will. When I signed it, I excluded Harry and Claire completely. Every dollar, every acre of land, every brick of the house would bypass them. Instead, I left it to the local veterans' home, the same place I had donated to quietly for years. When I closed that folder for the last time, it no longer contained their betrayal. It contained their erasure. The next day, word spread fast. At the diner, whispers turned into nods of approval. William cut them out, someone said. Gave it all to the veterans. Good man. By evening, the whole town knew. The son who had tried to steal his father's house would inherit nothing. Not a dime. Back at the motel, I sat by the window, folder resting on my lap. Outside, the neon light flickered, casting shadows on the walls. I thought of my wife, her voice reminding me years ago, dignity is the only inheritance that lasts. She was right. The folder was closed now, its final page signed. Tomorrow, when Harry came crawling, it wouldn't be money or property he'd be begging for, it would be mercy. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where legacies are either preserved or destroyed. I carried the folder under my arm as I walked down the aisle, each step echoing in the silent chamber. Townsfolk filled the benches, some out of curiosity, others because word had spread faster than wildfire. Harry and Claire sat at the defense table. He looked hollow, his jaw tight, his suit wrinkled as if he hadn't slept in days. She looked pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. For once, neither of them smirked. The judge called the case. My lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, stood and opened the folder on the desk. Papers slid out in neat order, bank slips, forged documents, eviction notices, all circled in red ink. Each page was a nail hammered into the coffin of their lies. The judge scanned them, frowning deeper with every sheet. Forgery. Unauthorized loan attempts. Misuse of funds. Mr. Whitman, he looked directly at Harry, these are serious allegations, and the evidence speaks for itself. Harry's composure cracked. He stood, voice shaking. Dad, please, don't do this. We made mistakes, but we're family. You can't throw us out like strangers. I kept my voice steady. You didn't treat me like family when you tried to erase me from my own home. Claire leaned forward, tears streaking her face. William, I swear, I didn't know about the loan. He told me you gave permission. I believed him. Please, don't punish me for his lies. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. I turned toward her, folder still open, and said quietly, you chose his side when you laughed at mine. The words made her crumble. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Harry reached across the table, desperation raw in his voice. I'll fix it. I'll pay it back. Just, give me another chance. You wanted me gone. Now it's your turn to leave. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused, letting the weight of the words settle. When the gavel finally struck, it wasn't just a ruling. It was an ending. The eviction was upheld. The will was recognized. And with that, their future in my house, in my life, was gone. Harry slumped back into his chair, defeated. Claire wept openly, her tears echoing in the hushed chamber. I gathered the folder, closed it firmly, and stood. Every eye followed me as I walked past the benches. Not because I was broken, but because I had endured. At the door, I paused. Behind me, I heard Harry's voice, softer now, almost childlike. Dad. I'm sorry. The words were heavy, almost genuine, but too late. I didn't turn back. I only said, sorry doesn't rebuild trust. It only reminds us it was destroyed. The sunlight outside the courthouse was blinding, but I walked into it steady, folder in hand. Tomorrow would bring the final reckoning, not in papers or rulings, but in the eyes of the community. When the courthouse doors swung open, the sunlight hit like a spotlight. The steps outside were lined with faces, neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who had come to witness the trial of betrayal and justice within one family. The sheriff escorted Harry down the steps, his hands cuffed, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. Claire trailed behind, shoulders slumped, clutching her purse like it was the last thing tethering her to dignity. The whispers from the crowd rose like a tide. There he is, the one who tried to steal from his own father. Shameful. William stood tall through it all. For the first time in months, the whispers weren't daggers aimed at me. They were arrows piercing him. I stood at the top of the steps, folder tucked firmly under my arm. It wasn't heavy anymore. The leather no longer burned against my skin. It had transformed from a weapon into a shield, from a burden into proof of survival. Neighbors approached. Mrs. Randall pressed my hand between hers, eyes wet. You've reminded us all, William, blood doesn't excuse betrayal. Mr. Lawson from the bank nodded solemnly. You've set a line no one can cross. People will remember that. I accepted their words, but I didn't bask in them. Respect wasn't a gift, it was a return of something that had been stolen from me. As I turned to leave, I heard her voice. Dad. Claire stood at the base of the steps, her face streaked with tears. Harry had already been loaded into the sheriff's car, his curses muffled by the closing door. She remained, trembling, broken. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. Please believe me, I never wanted it to go this far. For a moment, I saw her not as the woman who had laughed at my humiliation, but as a frightened soul who had tied her fate to the wrong man. I took a step down, folder still under my arm. Claire, I said quietly, forgiveness and trust aren't the same. I can forgive you. But I'll never trust you again. Her knees buckled as though the words themselves carried weight. She lowered her head, unable to meet my eyes. The sheriff's car pulled away, its siren silent but its meaning loud. The crowd began to disperse, some still whispering, others shaking their heads. The scandal would linger in this town for years, Harry Whitman, the son who betrayed his father. But so would another story, the father who didn't break. I walked down the steps, steady, my shadow stretching long in the afternoon sun. The folder pressed against my side, not as a chain, but as a reminder. Inside it were pages of theft, signatures of betrayal, and seals of justice. But to me, it was something else now. It was the record of my dignity. Family isn't blood, it's respect. And dignity is the inheritance I chose to keep. That night, back at the motel, I placed the folder on the desk for the last time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The war was over. The lamplight gleamed on the leather cover, turning it golden in the silence. For weeks, it had been the symbol of everything I feared, losing my home, my name, my worth. Now, it was the symbol of everything I had reclaimed. I closed the lamp, zipped my suitcase, and whispered into the quiet, "It's finished." Closure, and when I walked out of that room the next morning, folder under my arm, I wasn't carrying betrayal anymore. I was carrying victory.